Hello, I've been recently looking into the subject of friendship for a lecture at college. The sort of sociological context in which male and female friendships develop and so forth. And obviously, being pagan, my mind has wandered off of the purely sociological and gone down some of the more theological routes as well. So I've been looking at the understanding of friendship in different ancient societies and thinking about that, and chanced upon a Greek, minor goddess, daimona, a guardian spirit, Philotes, the guardian spirit or goddess or whatever you want to call her of friendship. And she, there isn't an awful lot about her, except a mention of the fact of her family, and that she is offended by the offering of destructive sacrifices, so animal sacrifice and the sorts of things that they would have engaged in the ancient world. She prefers bloodless, non-damaging forms of offering, which is always nice to hear. But Philotes comes from a somewhat challenging family. Her mother is Night, and her sisters have names that translate as things like outrage and conflict and deceit. So it put me in mind a little bit hearing that of Elpis, the spirit, the presence of hope, which sits at the bottom of Pandora's jar. So when the jar is opened and all of the diseases, the nosoi, all of the madnesses, the mania, and the various horrible things come flying out of the jar and plague humanity for the rest of eternity, at the bottom of the jar is sister, a relative of the horrible things that have come flying out, is Elpis, hope, the power to inspire people. And that idea that a family of rather dark, grim, gruesome forces can have a glowing, positive member. There's obviously a similarity going on there between the daughters of Nyx and the spirits in the jar, whether Elpis or Philotes, they are the light in the darkness, which is perhaps indicative that, partly even in the worst families there can always be a benevolent presence, but also that times of hardship and suffering and pain and discord and so on can bring us to value that which is truly important, whether it's friendship or whether it is the sense of hope to keep going on further into the future and not give up the struggle. And I think Philotes is understood, or was historically understood, in that sense, that even when you're surrounded by deceit and conflict and all of these other forces, that friendship is what becomes important to you. And true friendship, Philotes, I think, is most closely allied to Aristotle's third type of friendship. So he outlines three types of friendship, and Aristotle is the kind of go-to philosopher for the ancient views on friendship. So he talks about friendships of utility, people who are friendly towards someone because they get something from them. Maybe they get they suck up to the boss and pretend to like the boss in order to get a promotion at work, or they form friends who are useful in some other capacity. A friend who can, rewire their house or do a bit of gardening for them or give them a lift somewhere, and it's an exploitative kind of a friendship. And the context that Aristotle is talking about there is usually with the idea that the friendship only lasts as long as the utility lasts. So if the person, or one of the two people in the friendship, no longer requires that particular service, that particular utility, they tend to lose interest in the friend. Or if the friend who has been providing that service is no longer able to provide it for whatever reason, then again the friendship tends to dwindle and die out. It's perhaps making it sound very one-sided. It could, of course, be that a friendship of utility is a two-way street. So person A gets something out of person B, but equally person B gets something out of person A. So it's not necessarily that one is exploiting the other. They may both be gaining some some advantage. Sorry, big sneezing fit earlier, and my nose is quite blocked. Is gaining some advantage from the other one, but the friendship only lasts as long as the advantage lasts. He then, the second type, talks about friendships of pleasure, which are kind of party friendships. The friendships you form with people who are great fun to go clubbing and pubbing with, and go to events, and you have a right laugh and get drunk and dance on the tables or whatever it is you're going to do with each other. But again, there is always a but with Aristotle with these first two types. If you were in dire straits and you needed help, you probably would not phone that friend at 3 a.m. and ask for their help, because you know their friendship is all very much based upon party and fun and socialising. They're not there for you in any other context. They're only there to have fun with you, and when life stops being fun, they wander off somewhere else. Or you wander off somewhere else, because they are not there for you, but equally you're probably not there for them either. So it's all jolly and light, and there's nothing necessarily bad. Aristotle is not saying these are particularly wicked, horrendous forms of friendship, exploitative forms of friendship, just that they're a bit superficial. It's I suppose the kind of friendships a lot of people form in their teens and 20s, when they're very much into the pubbing and clubbing and so on. People to hang around with, have a laugh with, but those kind of friendships don't last much beyond that. So when people get married, they lose interest or have kids or get a demanding job or whatever it is, and they don't have the time, the energy to be pubbing and clubbing every 5 minutes, then those kind of friendships fizzle out somewhat. The third type is the one that Aristotle regards as crucial. There's an assortment of quotes from Aristotle and other ancient Greek philosophers talking about this idea of a true friendship, what he calls a friendship of virtue, being that of two souls in one body. Sorry, one soul in two bodies, other way around. That people are in such sympathy with each other that they support each other. And nurture each other and look after each other. And there's comparable quotes from things like the Havamal, the Nordic source of wisdom and guidance, and the various instruction texts of ancient Egypt, which are again giving quite similar sorts of advice when it comes to issues of friendship. And the idea that true friendship is where you both want the best for each other. So you each want the other person to be happy. Which isn't to say you don't have fun and games, and it isn't to say that occasionally you might not do practical beneficial things for each other. Help someone with their shopping if they're not very well or something like that. So you can still have that utility, and you can have that pleasure element coming into it. But chiefly, primarily, it's a friendship in which both parties equally care for each other. And it is meant to be a mutual thing, as Aristotle describes it, rather than a one-sided, unidirectional friendship where one of them cares and the other one doesn't, frankly, care about the first party in the friendship. As far as Aristotle and quite a lot of other ancient Greek philosophers were concerned, the true definition of a eudaimonic life, of a really good, meaningful, contented life, was one with lasting friendships. Romance, kind of terribly important nowadays, of course, with all these love films and novels and what have you, about finding your one Miss Right or Mr. Right or whatever, and finding your untrue love. The Greeks weren't against love. I mean, they had Aphrodite dispensing love here, there and everywhere. But they did feel that love was a kind of a madness that had a tendency to burn through. And as you get older and the passions die off, and the initial hormonal rush of being madly in love with somebody subsides into something a bit more sedate, that what really lasts potentially from cradle to grave, are friends. Ones who will be there for you, and if they outlive you, they will be there at your funeral, and if you outlive them, you will be there at their funeral, and reading the orations and the eulogies and praising each other, and in wanting the best for each other. There are various quotes about the importance of honesty in friendships. That unlike the kind of vacuous friendships you so often see on social media, where someone types some idiotic comment and everybody, well, lots of people. Oh, you're so right, you're so smashing, you're so marvellous, you don't have to change, you're brilliant just the way you are. That is not what Aristotle would regard as a friendship of virtue. For him, a friendship of virtue would be the kind of friendship where one person could say to the other, you're being a bit of a dick, stop it. You are better than this. You don't have to behave in this grotty way. You don't have to lie, cheat, deceive, threaten, or whatever grotty thing it is a person is doing. They will pull them up and say, be better. Not in a horrible, threatening, hostile way, but in a caring way. Where you say, I love you and I want you to be a better person than the dickhead you're behaving like right now. So there is that sort of blunt edge to the friendships of virtue that you don't tend to get with the friendships of utility or the friendships of pleasure, because bluntness would probably end the pleasure and maybe see the withdrawal of the utility, because this is not what is being sought for, is that sort of in-your-face honesty to say, oi, stop it, be better. So that's what Aristotle and various other Greek philosophers are describing, this need to care for another person, to want the best for them, to support them, to be with them, to help them, and know that they are there for you and they're helping you and they're supporting you. And that, I think, is what Philotes, the guardian spirit, the daimonia, is embodying chiefly, primarily. She's also a goddess associated with sex, interestingly enough, as well as kind of platonic romance. Platonic friendship, she's also kind of there for them all. Well, not necessarily sexualized romance, but just sex. So maybe a friends with benefits thing or something like that. I'm not wholly sure how the Greeks would have understood that. Perhaps viewing sex in a somewhat different light to the way we tend to focus on it these days. I'm going to need to delve into that a bit more to get a better grip on their understanding of what they were visualising in that sort of context when they're writing about those ideas. Empedocles talks about Philotes as the force for all good, and her sister Eris, strife, conflict, as the force behind all horrible bad things in the world. And obviously you've got a dichotomy going on there between the force that cares and nurtures and shares, and the force that hates and resents and sows discord and misery and hostile competition. Arguably, perhaps different sides of a coin, in that there are certain similarities between the states of mind that can lead you to want the best for somebody else, or equally in that sort of slightly Oscar Wilde sense of seething when you see your friends doing better than you are doing, sometimes resenting and competing with people that you should otherwise care about, and sometimes the one overlaps into the other. And this notion of love is also something that the Greeks explore in a variety of details. In English, obviously, we use the word love in 100 different contexts. You can love cake, you can love your dog, you can love your husband or wife, you can love your kids. All very, very different types of love, but we use the same word for everything. Whereas in the ancient Greek language, as well as the modern Greek language, there are multiple words for different forms and expressions of affection, which is something I kind of wish we had a bit more of in English. Philia is probably the closest to what we're talking about with friendship, in that it is a care for other people and a mutual support, primarily expressed through friendship, although it can also be of relatives. And there is some talk about between parent and child as the child becomes an adult, so it's no longer parent of a little child but parent of a grown-up child, and the dynamic changes more towards friendship than it does towards a dominant partner and a nurtured, cared for, vulnerable partner in that dyad. So the care for other people, that contrasts with agape, which the Christians took and ran with quite extensively. In the Christian understanding, agape is universal love, loving all people because they're there, not because they've done anything, not because they have particular virtues or qualities that you would find admirable. So you could have that sort of abstract love for all humanity, which would include the really horrible humans as well as the really nice humans and the really boring average humans. Philia is more valuing someone for what they are rather than the mere fact that they exist. So there's something peculiar about them that you are admiring, liking, wanting to get close to them because they have certain traits, qualities, virtues, etc. And they likewise are seeing certain virtues and traits in you. It's not that kind of abstract love for the entirety of humanity that, well, from a Christian perspective, Jesus, God, the Virgin Mary, manifest this sort of very almost an impersonal love where everyone is loved equally, not some people being singled out for their specialness and their uniqueness. You've also got eros, which is a much more sexualized, passionate, desiring kind of a love. It doesn't always have to be sexual, it can manifest in other ways, but obviously it's where we get the word erotic from, the desire for physical companionship, to be physically with them. And I think there is that, coming back to Philotes being both a goddess of sex and of friendship, there is an element of physical contact there. So that kind of primate wish to groom and touch and be physically close to another human being because you like them and you want to, well, not necessarily have sex with them, but you want to be physically close to them. It's echoing back to that primate tactility at the very roots of our society. And of course, in some cultures, tactile behaviour is understood quite differently. So in Britain, it's common enough to see two women walking down the street arm in arm, or nipping off to the toilet together if they're out at a restaurant or a pub or something. No one thinks anything of it. If two men walk down the street arm in Britain, or announce they're going to the toilet together, people are likely to assume some kind of sexual homoerotic context to what is going on, which it might be, but equally it could be a purely platonic thing. And in many other cultures, in most Asian cultures, for example, it's much more common for men who are completely platonic, there's no kind of sexual thing going on, to hold hands, put an arm around each other's shoulders, engage in physical contact. Certainly when I was researching into the topic of friendship for work, part of what I was looking at is male friendships and how they develop and how they struggle to develop. There is a number of researchers saying that there is an epidemic of male loneliness, that men struggle to form friendships with other men. And looking at the reasons why, and some of it is fear of being accused of having a sexual interest in the other guy when it's just a platonic friendship. So that kind of slightly overreaction towards perceived gayness, I suppose you'd call it, for lack of a better word, which is maybe a peculiarly British thing, although obviously not exclusively British, but the way it's seen as an accusation to sling about, hopefully not so much by the younger generation, but certainly older generations, it was often a cause of anger and conflict and hostility. But also perhaps that when certainly men get married, have children, there is an expectation all of their emotional energy will go to the wife and the kids, and they'll have very little left over to invest in whatever male friends they may have had before they got married. So those friendships have a tendency to dwindle down and down and down, become less and less significant, particularly when the guy gets to an age where his kids are grown up and offhand and no longer need him so much. He might start to acutely feel that lack of friendship in his life, that the only person he's emotionally close to possibly is his wife, and now they no longer have huge amounts of childcare to take up their time. That can lead to obviously awkwardness and that sort of slide into divorce and estrangement from one another as they realise there isn't an awful lot else in common. Now that the kids are found, what else do they talk about? There's that problem, so the need to revive the relationship with the wife. But also a lot of the research is saying there is this real need that instead of burdening all of emotional needs on one other person, if we had 2, 3, 4, however many people, close friends, to spread our emotional needs between, then we wouldn't squash one person under the weight of our neediness and drive them round the bend. We'd have different people to spend time with. Maybe that friend you spend time playing sports, and this friend you spend time gaming, and that friend you spend time going for a walk in the woods, or whatever it is that you do with each other. So there's different kinds of activities and different sorts of forms of engagement with different levels of friendship. It seems a shame, and certainly that a lot of the research is linking this loneliness not just to being a bit lonely, but arguing it has a serious impact on physical health or mental health, shortening lifespans, increasing rates of disease, maybe partly down to a bit of self-neglect, depression rates, anxiety rates, various other forms of mental health problems that come about from feeling very isolated, very cut off, very unvalued, unwanted. Particularly, I suppose, if somebody's spent their life being wanted in one very specific context, as a father, as a husband, or whatever, and they are less and less required in that context, then they might find that they've got a lot of time on their hands and they feel like they don't know what to do with themselves. And that's when the need for some kind of emotional engagement comes into play. Whether it's friendships with other men or friendships with women, or both, I suppose is down to the individual person. But that need to understand the depth and necessity of friendship and the importance of it. A myth, ancient myth, Greek myth, Roman myth, Celtic myths, Chinese myths, all sorts of myths are filled with stories about close friendships between two men, two women, who have each other's backs, go on adventures together, do amazing things together, battle the forces of evil, get up to all sorts of exciting things, and share life together. And that was recognised in the ancient world in all sorts of different contexts. And it seems to be something we have lost contact with a little bit, and it's worth trying to get back, trying to rebuild. There's various debates about how we kind of think of friendship and define it. Just as a little bit to finish on, realise this is getting a bit incoherent. One of the factors that's mentioned by a number of sociological researchers is that friendship is not fungible, which is an entertaining word that means not exchangeable. So in the sense that if you lost a £5 note and I say, well, here, I'll give you a fiver, one £5 note is as good as any other £5 note. They are fungible. You can swap one for another. It doesn't make a blind bit of difference. But a friendship is not like that. So if you've got a friendship with somebody and they die, they move away, they lose interest in you for some reason or another, you can't just randomly grab any old person and slot them in place and say, oh, you're my new friend, as if they are somehow a replacement for the friendship that no longer exists. So what we value about one person, if you've got 5 friends, you value them in 5 different ways. So the one is not a replacement for another. Obviously, if a friendship ends and it's not, say somebody's died for argument's sake, so you can't bring it back again, you can find other friends, obviously, but they're never going to be exactly the same. They're going to be a different kind of friendship, a different quality of friendship. So what's gone is gone, and has to be grieved as such. And I'm delving into the idea of friendship rituals, both in the kind of blood brother type things where people bond together with little rituals to seal their friendships, but also where a friend dies. You got stories of Achilles and Patroclus, for example, in ancient Greek myth, where Patroclus dies and Achilles is mourning him at the funeral. His dearest, best friend has gone, never to be replaced again. The mourning process and cutting off his hair, and everyone who is devoted to Patroclus and regarded him as a good friend too, they all go and cut off their locks and put the locks on the funeral pyre. And so the shaved head becomes a symbol of mourning and a symbol of grief for the loss of the friend. So there's traditions like that, both for the making of friendships and for the mourning of the end of a friendship through death or whatever other factors might take somebody away. And that's something I'd like to dig up more information on. If anybody knows of good sources to recommend, please do. That will be helpful. And I think I'll leave it there because I'm just rambling inanely. But yes, it strikes me as a subject we need to give more thought to. Particularly as men, we need to think about the quality of friendships in our lives and how we sustain them. To quote the Havamal, if visit a friend often, because an untrod path soon grows grass. I think that's the wording. So sort of neglect and absence of friendships can lead it to dwindle down to nothing, and how we engage and how we maintain friendships as well as how we form them in the first place becomes a subject of interest to me. And